for chapter 23 of The Wizard in My Shed, written by Simon Farnaby, illustrated by Claire Powell and read with the kind permission of Hodder Publishers. And in the last chapter, Merdyn caused some chaos at the magic show when he thought that the magician was Jerabo, but it actually wasn't Jerabo. And now, worst of all, Rose's mum has realised that Merdyn is not, in fact, Uncle Martin, and she is not very happy. So let's see what happens in Dreams Killed and Hearts Spilled. They all flew home in silence. The helicopter landed in Daffodil Close and Susie asked if Sergeant Murray could drop Shakir at home in a police car, which of course he sorted immediately. Rose's mum was so angry she didn't even let Chris blow Shakir a kiss goodbye. "I could arrest this Merdyn gentleman," offered Sergeant Murray as Shakir climbed into his squad car. "I could charge him for impersonating a relative. It's not strictly speaking a crime, but then neither is turning people into zoo animals, and he should be arrested for that and all, if you ask me." Susie thanked Sergeant Murray but declined the offer. She'd deal with the situation in her own way. He kissed her hand and bid her farewell. Inside the house, Mum told Merdyn that he couldn't live in the shed anymore. He'd have to find somewhere else tomorrow. Merdyn simply nodded. "As thee wish, mistress," he said. The evening's events had taken their toll on the ancient Warlock, and he opened the back door and trudged silently to the shed. Rose was less muted. She tried to explain that Merdyn had travelled forward in time and she was just trying to help him get home, but her protestations fell on deaf ears. "You can't just kick him out, Mum," Rose cried. "Yeah, where's he going to live?" complained Chris, supporting his sister for a change. "Not my problem," replied their mum sternly. "You both lied to me. You knew he wasn't your dad's brother all this time and you let me keep thinking that he was. I can't have a complete stranger living in my shed, and that is that." "He's not a stranger to me," said Rose sadly. "He's my friend. He can be selfish and a little rude sometimes, but I think he has a good heart." "And look at all the things he can do," said Chris. "What, like throwing fireballs and freezing people into blocks of ice?" Susie countered. "By the time they were defrosted, those men had frostbite. Not to mention the damage to the theatre. I won't have my children put in danger. No, thank you." He did get a bit fast and loose with the fireballs, but he thought he was battling his arch enemy. "He can do nice things too, Mum," said Rose. "Like he made us all invisible, and he made us float, and he made Bubbles talk, and he made Sergeant Murray fall in love with you with a love potion," said Chris impulsively. As soon as these words left his mouth, he wished he could hoover them back up again. He even did a sharp little intake of breath to see if it was possible. But alas, as any sensible reader knows, once words are said, they can't be unsaid. Susie looked at the pair of them. If Merdyn could have made a spell to make her eyes speak, they would have screamed, "Disappointment!" After letting her children squirm with guilt for fully 7 seconds, which is a long time in the guilt world, she said only, "Go to your rooms. Merdyn will be leaving tomorrow." After they'd gone, Susie went to a drawer in the kitchen and pulled it open. Inside were a dozen framed photos of Barry, Rose's dad. She picked one out. It was her favourite photo from their honeymoon in Corfu. They'd taken a selfie. It was in the days before camera phones, so it was a bit wonky, but they were love's young dream, their cheeks pressed together, eyes wide and happy, huge toothy grins spread across their faces, their young, just-married hair blowing in the breeze against the bright blue sky. It wasn't the discovery that Sergeant Murray didn't really love her that upset her. It wasn't even the fact that her children had lied to her. It was that in Merdyn she thought she'd found a connection to the kind, curly, brown-haired dreamer in the photo. Merdyn's eyes were bright blue, just like Barry's. Bright blue like sapphires. While she thought Merdyn was Barry's brother, a little piece of him was close to her again. But Merdyn wasn't Barry's brother. He wasn't even born within 1,000 years of Barry, if her children were to be believed. Susie put the dusty framed photo back in the drawer with the others, dropped onto the sofa and reached for a box of chocolate congratulations. Outside in the hall, peering through the crack between the door and the wall, Rose swallowed a sob and ran upstairs. Back in her room, Rose gave Bubbles his food and water and filled him in sadly on the evening's drama. "I did try to tell you that magic shows were rubbish," said Bubbles. "You were right. Remind me to listen to you more in future." Rose went to shut her bedroom curtains, but "Oh my God!" She jumped out of her skin. "Is it a fox?" squeaked Bubbles. It wasn't a fox, it was Merdyn, hovering outside the window like something out of a horror film. "May I come in?" he asked politely, his voice muffled by the double glazing. Rose opened the window and Merdyn climbed in. Although it was easier said than done, the window was really too small for him and he had to squeeze, turn, squirm and eventually ask Rose to pull him in. She tugged at his arms until he popped through the frame like a champagne cork, tumbling over Rose's bed into her bookcase, sending a pile of books and her lamp crashing onto his head. Ow! Rose looked at the saddened Warlock lying on her floor. You okay, Merdyn? Rose, if I am to be in this land forever, there's something I wanteth thee to know. Merdyn scrabbled through the books that had fallen around him until he found what he was looking for. Witches, wizards, and warlocks of old, the book Rose had taken from the library that day. Thou once did asketh me why I chose the path of darkness, he said, leafing through the book. Merdyn, you've had a tough day. You don't have to... No, Merdyn interrupted. I wanteth to showeth thee. The great war I did telleth thee about, it was against the fellow Van Helden. He pointed to a drawing in the book. To Rose, the man looked like the lead singer of a death metal band. He wore black animal skins and leather, and he had a necklace adorned with bear's teeth, a big black beard, and a studded bullhorn helmet on his head. He grinned viciously out at her, and she shuddered. A Viking, she said, before remembering her history class. Wait, Vikings didn't come till the 9th century or something, did they? I have never heard of these Vikings, said Merdyn. Van Helden was king of the Vandals. Oh, said Rose, excited. We have that word. A Vandal is someone who destroys something for no good reason. Merdyn laughed darkly. Could not be a more accurate description. They did cometh from Germania, and cutteth a swathe through all of Albion. They did killeth men, women, children, horses, dogs, cats, anything that got in their way, and plenty that didn't. I fought hard for my king and country, but alas, I was captured in the Battle of Alderley Forest. As I was W blood, the Vandals did keepeth me as their slave, putting me in a cage for months, and feeding me naught but scraps. Then one day I did overhear Van Helden talking. They were close to victory. They had the castle surrounded and were to attack in the morning. Van Helden did take a particular delight in describing how they would kill the king. But first he said he would... Merdyn faltered. Rose took his hand and squeezed it, nodding for him to carry on. First, they would kill the king's daughter, Evanhard, for naught but larks. Well, an anger did groweth inside me that was so hot it could have burned the forests of the earth. The Vandals had taken Thunderian from me, so I could not destroy them that way. However, I realised suddenly that beneath my cage did groweth wild grasses. I gathered 5 varieties, bearded darnel, cocksfoot, clover, pendulous sage, and witch's grass. Van Helden had a watchful eye on me at all times, but that night he had left for town to stock up on supplies. 'Twas then I did chant at the stone spell, Holcus Stoneretta. I did cast the spell through the whole battalion of Vandals. Every single one of them turned to stone that night. There it should have ended, but it did not. The Warlock lowered his head woefully. My anger was still burning so bright that next I did breaketh from my now unguarded cage to trigger an oblivion spell. What's an oblivion spell? Asked Rose cautiously. It turneth stone to ash, and sendeth it into the clouds forever, said Merdyn forlornly. Van Helden came back to findeth his entire army turned to dust and blown away in the wind. He did runneth back to Germania before I could do the same to him. Merdyn paused. I did destroy them all, Rose, he said. Some of these soldiers were not much older than thee. Once I had calmed down and realised the true horror of what I had done, I decided that I would care for no one but myself henceforth. For look what happened when I did careth, when I did trieth to do good. The Warlock stared into the distance as if reliving the horror. Even Bubbles stopped chewing for a moment, caught up in the tale. Listen, Merdyn, said Rose at last. What you did back then, well, you were angry. They were going to hurt Evanhard, who you clearly love, FYI. I can understand how terrible you feel, but I don't think that was the real you. Was it not? Merdyn groaned, not even bothering to mention that he hadn't a clue what FYI meant. Look what I did this night. I did nearly roasted that poor charlatan like a chicken. But you didn't, Rose reminded him. Don't give up on the idea of doing good with your powers. Imagine how you could help people. It's not too late to make it into the history books. Merdyn smiled at her. Bless thee for saying so, child, but that sort of thing changeth a man, maketh a man an island. Or a woman, Rose pointed out sadly. That's what I did when my dad died too, shut people out. Life's very lonely that way, but at least you can't get hurt. Or hurt anyone else, added Merdyn thoughtfully. Rose, I have been meaning to ask of thee, What did happen to thy father? Rose wasn't expecting this question, but as Merdyn had been straight with her, she thought it only polite to answer, even though it made her feel uncomfortable. He had a rare heart condition. It's complicated, but basically his heart was kind of too big, and one day it just stopped. I am so sorry, Rose, said Merdyn, and he meant it too. Anyway, Rose continued, adopting an upbeat tone. When he was alive, he was an inventor, and he made some pretty cool stuff. He invented this, in fact. She took Bubbles out of his cage. What? Guinea pigs? Yelped Bubbles incredulously. Not you! Rose removed a tray from underneath the cage floor and showed Merdyn. The tray was full of poos. Anyone who has a guinea pig knows their sawdust gets covered in poos mega quickly, she said. So Dad invented a sub-air system that pulls the poos through the bedding and safely into a tray below, leaving the sawdust above nice and clean. He called it a poover. Get it? Hoover? What be a hoover? Asked the Warlock. I don't get it, said Bubbles. But I knoweth 'tis ingenious, added Merdyn, and in it is thy father's spirit, I'll warrant. What do you mean? Asked Rose. Remember I toldeth thee that the earth is all one? Humans, animals, the grass, the trees, even poovers. I tell thee, with this strange contraption, thy father is with thee always. Rose thought about what Merdyn had just said, then smiled. I like that. I like that a lot. Merdyn nodded back as if to say, of course you do, because it's true. Then he started to help Rose tidy up the books he'd knocked over. Rose wasn't sure what would happen next. She'd keep trying to get Merdyn home, she guessed. By the looks of things with her mum, she needed that singing spell more than ever now, but at least she and Merdyn were in it together. Tomorrow we better find you somewhere else to live, she said as they finished tidying, and you'll need to get a job. A job? Heaven forfend, groaned Merdyn. He floated up to the open window, banged his head a few times on the frame trying to get out, then drifted back towards the shed. Before she pulled the curtains, Rose watched as Merdyn shut the shed door behind him and sighed. In her head, these words she said, I shall miss the wizard in my shed. That's the end of chapter 23. Join me next time for 24. A failed ham and a sandwich of jam. Have a great time, everybody.